we've been talking about. Yesterday in particular, at this time yesterday morning, we hosted Roger Martin Fagg, who's a behavioral economist. He's a regular for Plaza. We have him at AGMs as well as giving updates from time to time. And that was particularly fascinating because it does resonate to what today's subject is about this morning, which is around Brexit. So we'll come back to that in a minute. And before we get on with our Brexit discussion, which compared to COVID-19 seems almost a world away, but it isn't. It's only a matter of days away, and it has a massive impact on our industry. So it's really important that we try to gain some understanding of what it might or might not be. And today, we might even be ahead of the government because I don't think they have a real understanding of what it might or might not be at the moment. So I'm hopeful that this discussion will prove to be a useful one. So mentioning Roger Martin Fagg from yesterday, he suggested or intimated that we will have a deal for Brexit and there will not be a no-deal Brexit. Well, be interested to see what our panelists have to say about that today. We have three esteemed panelists, and so let me introduce them for you right now, and before we get into the discussion itself. So we have from EFM, a director of EFM, Lisa Ryan. Welcome, Lisa. Lisa's company, she's been there for 22 years, and they basically work supporting events and sports and the entertainment industry for logistics and transportation. So welcome, Lisa. We're glad that you could make it. And we also have a representation from the Musicians Union, which is Naomi Pohl, and Naomi is the Deputy General Secretary. And just to give you some idea, there are 32,000 registered musicians with the MU, which is phenomenal. Thank you, Naomi, for joining us. And finally, we have from the London Chamber of Commerce, we have Peter Bishop, who is the Chief Executive. And when he's not doing that, he is the Chairman of the International Certificates of Origin, which is based in Paris. So obviously a well-travelled gentleman. So before we press on with any type of conversation around Brexit, I'm going to hand over to the panel to give them an opportunity to give you a bit more background. Where they're from and who they are. So let me start with Naomi. Naomi, give us a bit more background about the MU, the work you're doing, and what it means to those people.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So I'm Deputy General Secretary of the Musicians Union. You mentioned we've got 32,000 members, and our members are, they have portfolio careers. About 90% of them are self-employed and they work across various different areas of the industry. So they might do a bit of gigging, they might do some studio session work in the week, they might do some freelance work with an orchestra, do some music teaching, and that's how they make their living. Obviously, during the COVID-19 crisis, most of that work has fallen away. So our members are already in crisis and already a lot of them are in financial hardship at the moment. Brexit looming is obviously something that, in a way it's gone a bit onto the back burner because I think we talked about it solidly for a couple of years. It was on the agenda for every meeting that I attended, and the COVID-19 crisis has somewhat taken over. But it is something that's potentially a major issue for our members. The biggest issue for them obviously is touring in the EU. They've been used to freedom of movement, and it's given members an opportunity to access work opportunities in the EU. And one of our members, when quite shortly after the Brexit referendum, started to send us postcards from different territories in the EU that she was working in. And she was she's a freelance orchestral musician. She would go and do kind of one-off concerts or just a few days in one territory, move on and do an engagement in another territory. And she'd be doing that on kind of daily basis. And a huge amount of her work takes place within the EU. So for her, really presents an enormous roadblock for her. We've been lobbying for a musician's passport or a touring passport, which we would like to have in place for a 2-year period so that our members can freely work and travel around the EU in the 2-year period. We've had a lot of cross-party support for the idea, but we've had nothing concrete. And looking at the text of the draft trade agreement, there's nothing in there at the moment specifically for musicians or performers and crew. So, at the moment, we're still in a position where we've got no real assurances that our members will be able to tour and do the work that they do in the EU now, without additional admin, additional cost and bureaucracy, and the challenges that carnets present. So it's something we're still lobbying on and still working on, but we haven't really had access to anyone who's doing the drafting or the negotiating. And it's something that we're also working on with UK Music, which is the umbrella body for the commercial music industry. So there's a lot of different interest groups there, not just musicians, but also labels who are looking at the issues around exporting into the EU, and also the live sector, who a lot of the time will be trying to organise the work permits that are necessary if there's a major tour going on. So it is something we're very concerned about. Obviously, we're preparing for a no-deal Brexit, but at the moment there's not a lot of information we can offer to members. But I can talk a bit more today about the work we've been doing and what we're asking for, and what might be the situation for musicians.
Brilliant. Thank you, Naomi. A really good introduction. Appreciate it. Now, you mentioned that the Brexit was on the lips of everybody every day, and it was. And we held a joint Brexit kind of seminar in London about a year ago, I think it was. Peter was actually presenting at it, I do remember, and it was with the MU, the Music Industries Association. We did it with, and of course it was highly I think toxic isn't the word, because there was obviously a lot of feeling about the fact that we were leaving Europe, and the people in the room didn't want us to leave Europe. Yes, you're right. As soon as COVID-19 arrived, that all slipped into the background. But nevertheless, it's on its way, whatever it is, and we've got to get prepared for that too. So it might be interesting to come back and talk about numbers, if you have numbers of the amount of people this might impact within your particular group. And so, yeah, we'll come back and talk to you in a moment, but thank you very much. Lisa, let's come to you, and please give us a bit more detailed introduction about you, what you do, and how you think it might be impacted.
Right, okay. So yeah, I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at EFM. I've been with the company for 16 years. I'm one of the board directors there. I've been in the industry for over 22 years. And we basically are a logistics company. So air freight, sea freight, trucking, carnets, customs clearances, all the whole remit of logistics. But we specialise exclusively in working in the events, entertainment, music, sport, exhibition arenas, so all the kind of broad spectrum of our industry. We work with many of the Plaza members, lighting, sound, all different rental companies you'll be well aware of, transporting equipment around the world and back, not just within the EU, but broader territories. We have been, obviously, we will be impacted. I've been asked many times to comment on Brexit. Obviously, being in the logistics world, it's a question that everybody's asking. All our clients are asking us. We did some very early consultation with the DCMS in terms of representing our customers, the range of customers we work with, and what the typical challenges would be for those customers with Brexit, with a no-deal Brexit, particularly, what that might look like for them. I've had so many clients in contact recently asking about how it will work. I would love to have the answer to that question, but sadly, no one knows how it's going to work at the moment, aside from the obvious view of going back to the old days of having to use ATA carnets, which feels like a big step back, you know, after freedom of movement of goods. Like Naomi said, in terms of the people, there's also the equipment to get around. Typically on a music tour, a lot of the artists historically would come from overseas and start a tour in the UK and then go off into Europe. So how's that going to look for them? Will they come to the UK first still in the future? Will they come to the UK at all? How will that look? You know, how will we handle that from a customs perspective? The easy part that there are countries that are already raising carnets and using carnets for customs and moving their equipment in and out of different countries freely. So, you know, from that perspective, it is a tried and tested formula, but not every country accepts carnets on a global basis. So not everybody will be able to raise a carnet to come into the UK. And from the perspective of people who are in the UK, particularly artists who are maybe just starting out, they've not got budgets, you know, carnets cost money. There is an administrative burden. If it's a land move going across from the UK into Europe, there's horrendous talk of huge backlogs at the border and trucks getting stopped and traffic building up in Kent and all this kind of scaremongering that's been going on. But, you know, there is a real consideration. There will be time constraints. The days of doing back-to-back tours and shows of, you know, in and out, in and out, in and out, how's that going to look with potentially the requirement to have customs clearances taking place that weren't there before, that will have a time impact. So yes, I'm working with sports teams. I've got, you know, broadcasters and sports teams who are, unlike the musicians, are already going and competing. We had equipment going to Roland Garros for the French Open tennis recently, broadcasting equipment. We've got equipment for sports teams that are going off to warm weather or high altitude training camps and things over the winter season. Questions are being asked around equipment that's already in Europe, that's already gone and will be coming back after the 1st of January. People are looking to send stuff before Christmas. I'm sure Peter will elaborate on this going forward, but the carnet, at the moment, there is no clarity at all in terms of how to raise a carnet to go to Europe, because typically, unless it's going to Switzerland or Norway, there's been no need. So yes, I could go on forever on that, but there's a whole heap of challenges that we're trying to work through and keep abreast of, but it's very much everyone's in a wait and see situation at the moment also.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lisa. It's it sounds like a real minefield at the moment. I hope that we might be able to sort some of that out before the end of the hour. So I'm going to hand over to Peter now, who's going to give you a bit more background on what he does and his organisation, before we press on with some more discussion.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Well, like Lisa, I wish I had more answers about what will the situation be on the 1st of January next year. That will be a regular theme, I'm afraid. But I will promise, once we know, and HMRC have told us about various aspects of trade, we will, through you, Peter, get back to your delegates here. And well, Naomi, my wish is that I had as many members at the London Chamber of Commerce as she has in the MU. I know it's not comparing like for like, but that's very, very impressive. The London Chamber has probably been going around for longer than the Musicians Union. I don't know, actually, but we started in 1881. We were set up in the City of London to, by merchants, actually, who basically realized that if you spoke with the voice of many and told the government that taxes were too high, you were more chance to get a positive answer than if it was just one. So based on that principle, we set up. We've always been into foreign trade, and that's the element that I will talk about most when I give a presentation later. We were the ones who actually got the Suez Canal tariffs down when it all kicked off. It actually started before the chamber was formed, but the tolls for passing through the Suez Canal, thus missing out the whole chunk of Africa, had got so high that people were actually going round it again. So we lobbied the Egyptian government with its architect, a guy called Joseph de Lesseps, and got them down, and people started using it again. So in international trade, it's always been at the very heart of what we do. Yes, for the last 6 months, we've been very focused on COVID and helping our members get through it, and had some successes with government changing their minds in various areas. But of course, yes, the reason we're here today is that, you know, in the background all that time, despite the fact that we've had a couple of rehearsals for this, coming up to March 2019, up to October last year too. This is now, you know, if two things can be front and center, then it is COVID and it is the end of the transition period and leaving the EU. I don't know, Peter, whether you want comments on the whether there will be a deal or not. Are you going to come back to that?
Yeah, I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's probably enough for me for now.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for the intros. For those of you watching, if you have any burning questions, then feel free to send them in. We're going to be looking at those questions later on towards the close of the session, which is around 11 o'clock. So yeah, please do send your questions in, and we'll answer as many as possible. But just to start it off, we're going to go back to Peter, who's got a number of slides which he wants to run through, and then I will then attempt to ask some intelligent questions to the panel to see if we can learn anything from what they hope to achieve, or what they hope the government achieves in the process of us getting out of Europe. Over to you, Peter.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much. And I think a couple of my slides are going to come, or first slide is going to come up now through Jamie, I think. Anyway, until it does, let me just say, okay, you've heard that I am the Deputy CEO of the London Chamber. I'm also the Chairman of the International Certificate of Origin Council, which is something run by the World Chambers Federation from its HQ in Paris. Previously, I was the chairman of the World ATA Carnet Council. You heard Lisa mention carnets. I'm sure they'll come up quite a lot in our conversation. But as well as that, for 18 months up to March 2019, over that period anyway, I was seconded to the Department for Exiting the European Union and the Cabinet Office on a kind of, you know, one day every now and then basis to give my input on origin rules, Northern Irish border too, actually, at that time. And there's been such a hell of a lot of work going on at lots of levels, and I was in with the civil servants there doing an amazing job, I must say, of trying to make sense of it all. And since June 16, when the referendum happened, the first round of presentations that I used to give on Brexit, as people were trying to get to grips with this, there was a lot of background to be given, a lot of history, and I was using acronyms all the time. So ECSC, the European Coal and Steel Community, EEC, of course, ECU, ECU, the ERM, the CAP, and then the big dates were 1973, 1975, 1992, which was the end of the so-called completion of the internal market. And the figures that were popping up all the time were people like Schuman, de Gaulle, Lord Cockfield, who we sent over to, or Margaret Thatcher sent over to Brussels in the mid-80s to give the push to the single market. And who can forget Jacques Delors too. All of that is now history, and the only date that is crucial currently is 1/1/21, and I think that is 78 days from now, just 78 days. Hopefully, with all the other things going on as well, but with this Plaza event, it will go some way in helping the delegates prepare. Now, I can't see my slides, so I don't know whether they're coming up, but the next slide is meant to be on what, oh yeah, so next slide, please, yeah. Okay, yeah. I can now, yeah, thank you. So what I will focus on is the documentation that the London Chamber is associated with in cross-border trade. So I'm talking about certificates of origin, a new one for us, which Lisa mentioned earlier, customs declarations and carnets. But I will start with where we are now. So that's the next slide, please. Earlier this year, the government published the first global tariff for the UK for 47 years. Naturally, as part of the EU, we're part of the common external tariff used by them. So it is packed with the duties, the levies, the requirements, the VAT treatment. And whereas it was actually something we subscribed to, I mean, the Chamber, we had two copies, massive tomes in 3 volumes with updates. It's now free if you go to your search engine and go UK global customs tariff. It is, if I'm looking for things that improve our potential trade, then I'd say that UK tariff is one of those. It is a simpler tariff. Things like so-called nuisance tariffs, any duties below 2% have gone. Overall, the average tariff rate has gone down from 7 to 6%. So that is a good thing. While I'm on the tariff, GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences, whereby we, as part of the European Union, gave beneficial tariff rates to goods coming in from less developed markets. That is being transposed totally, and we will echo that in the UK global tariff. Another good thing, I would say. To complement that, there's a new border operating model. The latest version of it only came out a couple of weeks ago. Its full title is The Border with the European Union, Importing and Exporting Goods, and it came out from the Border and Protocol Delivery Group this month. I mean, when I talk about the tariff as a mine of information, boy, this really is too. The contents page, which are divided into import first and then export, go through everything from animal products, high-risk food, live aquatic animals, 88 carnets, of course, rough diamonds, and then it's rather helpfully got changes that have been made from the existing system as part of the EU. And you can compare what has changed and what you need to look out for. So really well worth having. Again, this is free. You just go, it's one of the, it used to be the HMSO, Her Majesty's Stationery Office publications. And again, if you use your search engine and search for the border with the European Union, well worth looking at. So I was going to say something about the negotiations, but perhaps, Lisa, I will leave that until you want to share it with the panel and get all views. So just before we go to the next slide, just say a little bit more about the border changes. You may have seen, and then this ties in with what Lisa was saying about, there's going to be a lot of extra traffic. There's been a lot of extra burdens on people moving goods in and out. And just a couple of weeks ago, at the beginning of the month, Michael Gove, the responsible cabinet off minister, announced plans for these 10 proposed sites for inland border controls on goods from 2021. So we've got a couple in Kent, Ashford and Ebbsfleet, the North Weald airfield in Essex, and then ones round the country, Birmingham, Warrington, Holyhead, and so on. He also confirmed, Mr. Gove, that trucks heading for the EU would have to carry a special permit to enter Kent. right? And those without correct papers would face a £300 fine. A report that came out with Mr. Gove's letter was urging and supporting that port, I mean, Heathrow and Dover, the two biggest ports by volume and value in the UK, but there's a move to try and spread that out round the country. We've got at least 120 ports in the UK, airports and seaports. So not just focusing on two would obviously spread the risk. Okay, if I move on to the next slide now, which is really about certificates of origin and the permanent export of goods. We'll come on to the temporary one momentarily. So many companies, and again, you know, Lisa's work will know this very well. Many companies, when they export, they are required by their buyer or sometimes by the overseas authorities to raise a non-preferential certificate of origin. Sometimes it might be because the payment method, the documentary letter of credit, for example, calls for, as well as a packing list, an airway bill, invoice, a certificate of origin issued by an authorized chamber of commerce. Sometimes it might be because the importer wants to or proposes potentially to re-export those goods, so feels a need to have the origin of the goods confirmed. Now, the certificate of origin system, the non-preferential one, been going back like this chamber actually since Victorian times. The first, I understand, the first certificate of origin was issued by the Vienna Chamber in the 1880s. Now, since then, they have, you know, many millions have been issued over time. The one we have been using, the UK has been using, of course, ever since we've been in the European Union, is an EU format one. You don't actually need certificates of origin now to ship goods into the EU, or very rarely do. Sometimes the buyer will call from them. But the format that will be called for, that will be used from the 1st of Jan, which has been proposed and accepted through the Department of International Trade. Everything has been prepared. It's all as per Annex K of the Kyoto Convention on trade facilitation. So it is pretty straightforward. But that is the certificate of origin that we, London Chamber, and all the other chambers in the UK that issue these will be using from the 1st of Jan. The only difference is that I expect it to be called for much more often than it is now from buyers in the EU. So I'm afraid another potential rafting up of the administrative burden, the bureaucratic burden for traders. That's called a non-preferential certificate of origin, because it doesn't bestow any tariff preference. It doesn't mean that instead of paying 10% duty, you pay a lower one. The preferential certificate of origin is one which is called for or usable under free trade agreements currently between the European Union and many nations overseas. I mean, it's about 70 nations covered by 40 free trade agreements, FTAs. From the 1st of January, the position is not totally clear yet, but certainly a replacement for what is now an EUR, which is used for the UK goods as part of the EU, if they comply with certain origin rules in accordance with the FTA, getting a preferential import duty into one of the 70 countries. And those countries can be European, like Switzerland, Iceland, Finland, and so on, but not EU. Of course, that's a single market. They can be in Asia, they can be Mexico, South Africa, and so on. What the UK government has been trying to do over the past period has been rolling over as many of those free trade agreements as possible, with the aim that they will replace the existing EU one. So if I give Switzerland as an example here, the UK have negotiated with Switzerland a free trade agreement that will come into place on the 1st of January, whether there is an EU-UK trade deal or we go to WTO rules, okay? It will be a version of the current EUR form, won't be called that. It's all been prepared, but it hasn't come out yet, and it won't be ready until just before the transition period ends. Since we have left and the transition period has begun, the UK has negotiated a trade agreement with Japan. So of course I alighted on it and to see what the origin requirements were or are. That hasn't happened yet, I'm afraid, although it came out I think in May or June. The actual text of the FTA hasn't come out as far as I'm aware, and so I don't know, but I'll be looking out for the use of registered exporter schemes where people would have to sign up for, and then maybe instead of a certificate of origin being called for, some certification of the invoice or some statement on the invoice by the exporter who's a registered exporter, which will be sufficient for the import customs needs. If I get to the next slide now, I'll just say a quick word about customs declarations. Again, Lisa mentioned this, but she didn't put the numbers on them, I don't think, but it is quite stark. All the time we've been in the European Union and single market, the customs union and single market, around, in a given year, 50 million, 55 million customs declarations are made to evidence an import or an export. When we go to the 1st of January, again, whether there is a trade deal with the European Union or not, that figure has been estimated to rise to 280 million, possibly 300 million. We do a lot of business with the European Union. We import more than we export overall, and so that's why that figure is going to go up so enormously. We, London Chamber, and the chamber system in the UK have been, or it's been hinted at that we've been asked to step in by the government because the customs brokers and freight forwarders and so on accept that this is such a massive rise that they will need, or help will be needed in order to service the requirements of all the new cross-border transactions that need to be evidenced. So we will be going out to customers and indeed freight forwarders too, to say, look, can we help? We've set up here at the London Chamber a customs deck unit that will be issuing from the 1st of Jan. The good news is that the government did have the foresight to put a pause on the requirement for import declarations until the 1st of July next year. They will have to be summarized and recorded at some point, but it will only be exports that you will definitely, at this moment in time, have to make a customs deck thereafter. Okay, if I go on to the next slide now, because I was talking there about permanent exports, but of course temporary exports are a key part of, I think, what this audience today will be interested in. So when musicians or events or trade fairs or exhibitions involving the movement of professional equipment from one country to another, then one of the options in over 70 countries worldwide, 70 countries who have become signatories of the Istanbul Convention or the previous convention on the temporary import and export of goods. That is a system that's been going since 1964-65. It's a tried and trusted system whereby somebody who wants to move goods and then return them in the same state to the UK will not have to get involved in paying customs duty in market or VAT or anything else other than in import and export licensing. It doesn't override that. But that, of course, has not needed to apply. The 80A kind is not needed to apply until the 1st of January 2021 in the European Union. So from that time, again, whether there is a deal or no deal, there will be an option for people going into France, Germany, Italy, and so on block, right? So you wouldn't need a carnet for every single state. It would cover the whole area. That will be available to them. We made amendments to the carnet form so that on the front cover it indicates that we are a separate independent country from the European Union, and similarly on the back cover too. Other than that, it's all as people know, it is a complex form because it is a 33-month one. Well, that's one reason why it's sort of fairly complex. It gives customs, both sides of the borders, as it were, time to assess whether they've got demonstrable evidence that the goods that went out are the same goods that came back, and that every possible avenue has been explored in order to make sure that A, they are not deprived of any customs duty, but B, that the transaction has gone as it should. We are in the process, we were pre-COVID more heavily than now, translating the whole carnet process into an app, something called the Mercury project, which we're working out with our colleagues in Paris, the team that took over when I stood down as chairman. We will have more on that, but it has we are extending the pilot phase for that, and COVID really has made its mark there. The number of carnets that have been issued in the UK issued globally over the last 6 months has dropped dramatically, as obviously restrictions on people and the fact that there have hardly been any physical trade fairs, exhibitions, sporting events. Some come back, yes, but not many. Now there are two particular issues which I'd love to be able, that's the next slide, please. I'd love to be able to give you definitive answers on, but I'm afraid I can't, but I will when I can. That's journeys to and from. So if I'm moving goods from the UK to, say, France, the others in December 2020, and I know I'm bringing them back in the new year. That will cross the bridge, the time bridge, and so am I able to take out a carnet now, or should I take out a carnet? How will I deal with the customs angle on that? We have suggested to HMRC, without getting too much into it, that we would issue a Brexit carnet, which would be yellow vouchers only, which would show export and then re-import when the goods come in, where we think, and that's a solution we've also put to our European partners who want to do it the other way round. But HMRC have got a very, very long to-do list, as I'm sure everyone is aware. And we are awaiting a reply. We have been promised one by the end of this month, so hopefully we will get it by then. The other thing is Northern Ireland, of course. When the withdrawal agreement was signed last year, it did put a border in the Irish Sea, and it did bring up the fact that an 80A carnet would be an appropriate document in shipping goods from mainland UK to another part of the UK, Ireland, Northern Ireland, which is, I mean, in theory possible. Whether it's, you know, what one wants is another matter. So again, that's in the sort of pending tray with HMRC, whether that needs to be done. There are simplified procedures for Northern Ireland, so it's in, you know, I'm not sure, I don't think it will be used, or indeed should be, but it's still, but I can't actually give an answer on it. Yeah. And then when I talk about Northern Ireland, I can't help mention the Republic of Ireland, which has got a special relationship with people with the UK. And again, there are certain proposals around for it being unnecessary to have a temporary import regime with Ireland, with the Republic. Again, I will have to come back to you on that. Now, my final slide is really just some key sources that are around. There is so much information out there. There's, you know, probably too much in a way, but you actually need someone to curate it for you. Some companies have been able to appoint a Brexit or an EU exit champion. Others have the ability and the finance to go to the big four or similar. I mean, ultimately, you know your business best. You know what you want to do, and so, you know, you're not going to get all the answers even from the sources that I mentioned. But we, London Chamber, have set up for the second time round, having had an EU Brexit desk before March 2019 and October 2019. We've now got an EU exit hub, which is, of course, not only going to cover trade, but people, services, data, all the myriad of other things that are going to impact. And as I said at the outset, 78 days to go. Yesterday, just one other source, the European Union relaunched their market access website, which is really fantastic, I think. And the good news, and it's got everything you need to do to export to and from markets. The good news is, I understand we can access that even when we leave the European Union, deal or no deal. So, Pete, I think that's probably enough from me for the time being. Back to you.
Thank you. What a phenomenal amount of detail. Who would have thought? I know, we knew it was going to be like that. We knew it was going to be like that. Thank you, Peter. So what it leaves is because Peter's was a lot of general stuff, but I was trying to pick out the bits that actually would apply to our sector and our industry. So so he mentioned stuff in there around the fact that we've got you know, a free trade deal agreed with Switzerland and other countries, and then so questions came into my mind about, well, when goods are travelling to Switzerland and from Switzerland to the UK, what happens to the goods whilst they're in transit? Is there some kind of taxes to be paid that might be held, and I don't know. But let me go back to Naomi in terms of listening to what Peter has said, which is a lot of information. What's the best outcome? What's the best outcome for musicians who want to travel, and indeed those musicians who will be halfway through some kind of event when D-Day happens? And Peter did give information about pre-doing carnets and all sorts of things. But you know, what sort of impacts will it have on work permits and that kind of thing? So give us some feedback on that if you could, and then we'll go to Lisa and talk to her about similar questions. Yeah,
sure. Well, I mean, we've only got a certain amount to go on at the moment is the problem. But the draft trade agreements that we've looked at do provide a route for short-term business visitor, which I think is probably, even though my understanding of a short-term business visitor would be me attending a meeting somewhere in the EU on behalf of the Musicians Union, where I'm employed and engaged in the UK and I'm just representing an organisation, if you like. But we think that there's an annex being drafted, which we've not had sight of, which could actually provide some more clarification around musicians in particular, or performers in particular, and what we'd like and what we hope for is that we might get something along the lines of 90 days of work in a 180-day period. So I don't think we've got a problem with visas. I think we should be treated as non-visa nationals, but I think the issue is the work permit issue. And for our members, the problem that they've got is that they're going to be travelling around from territory to territory. They might be individuals who don't have the backing of an organisation who can help with the admin. So for them, this is quite an intimidating system, and they are very concerned about the carnets issue. A lot of our members remember having to literally pick up a broken drumstick and make sure you bring it back with you to prove that you didn't sell it when you were travelling around. So that sort of thing is really going to cause an enormous headache. We've got quite a good system for musicians coming into the UK, the permitted paid engagements route into the UK, which at the moment is a 30-day period, but we'd like to see that extended. So what we've been trying to argue for is that if the UK system is really great for musicians travelling and performing here, then we can ask for something reciprocal in the trade agreement with the EU. So I think that's been our approach. We've got permitted paid engagements and we've got permit-free festivals where a musician can come and perform at a festival, but that's at the moment just it's a sort of one-off engagement at a festival. It's not multiple entry. I mean, we're going to get information out there for our members as soon as we have it. We're still making the arguments to whoever we can get access to. But I think, just to reassure performers and crew members, I don't think it's visas that we're going to be looking for. I think it is going to be a work permit situation. And worst case scenario, there's no deal. We're going to be flagging up what work permits we're going to need in individual territories and what paperwork we need.
That'll be my next question about work permits. So is it a permit for the whole of Europe, or would you have to get, when you travel from Western Europe to Eastern Europe, would you need a different work permit? Would you need some different access forms? So hopefully not.
Well, we don't know. I think the point is that we want to have an EU trade agreement so that, if there's a deal, then we are looking at something that's EU wide. I think if we don't have a deal, we potentially are looking at per territory arrangements, which could be a real headache for our members. I don't know if Peter's got a different perspective on that, but my understanding is we could be having to advise members on each individual territory and their requirements for permits.
Right. Lisa, when it comes to tours and touring right now and moving goods around Europe post January. Well, actually, two questions. One question is, if the tour starts before D-Day and it's still over there, and are they stuck there? Do they have to stay where they are until they've completed appropriate paperwork? I'm sure paperwork will be there in advance. And what about the thought of, if you've got a company that does a production company that does an awful lot of work in Europe, would there be any helpful advice to them saying, well, actually, to save you moving it to and from the UK all the time, why don't you just get some warehouse space somewhere in the middle of Europe and just disable all the administrative work? Don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's your second point there is a very valid one. I mean, certainly, the days of just kind of rolling trucks in and out 1 week and the next week, I think people will need to have a good hard think about whether or not they want to base equipment in Europe for a period of time, maybe on a permanent basis. I mean, there are a lot of questions. There are a number of big lighting, sound, video companies who have multiple businesses in Europe. And at the moment, they move equipment between Belgium, Germany, Spain, the UK. They move their equipment around to source the needs of the local market. So UK is busy, they bring stuff in from Germany or Spain and vice versa. How that is going to work is going to be fairly, I don't have an answer to that, because a lot of that falls outside of the kind of more straightforward carnet route. You know, if you're going on a tour and you get a carnet raised, you get your carnet stamped going into France. You then you can free circulate in Europe with your carnet. So you've got your carnet, you can go for up to a year, and you can come back again. So that's sort of straightforward once the system that Peter touched on earlier is agreed in terms of getting those carnets raised. Because at the moment, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Peter, but I can't get carnets raised at this moment to go to France, because there is no system in place to do so. So there is, you know, I've got one of my clients, the British rowing team. They're going out in December and they want to take equipment, but I can't raise a carnet for them as things stand at the moment. The way of dealing with that, there is an option for customs declarations here in terms of British returning goods. So that, you know, when we move things generally to countries without using carnets, you know, goods going to the Middle East, for example, which is a common destination for many British suppliers in this industry, you know, when it comes back, they can be declared as returning goods. But it's how they physically prove that those goods left the country in the first place, when right now there is no requirement to do a customs declaration. I mean, the advice we're giving to those people is, you know, to make sure that they've got, if they're traveling on their own, if they're loading up a van and they're going themselves driving off to Europe before Christmas, to make sure they've got copies of keep their copies of their bookings with the Channel Tunnel or with the airline or whoever it might be. Do up a packing list and an invoice so you've got a record of what it was that you took. You know, because that literally at the moment is the best advice that I for one can give people. You know, in terms of raising, comment coming up here. Yeah. But you know, on paper, if you're going to be doing a tour and you're going to be going on a tour to Europe, the best way of dealing with it is to raise a carnet. But you know, a carnet is a cumbersome document. It is a pain, as Naomi touched on. You know, you break a drumstick, technically speaking, that broken drumstick needs to return. You know, it is ridiculous trying to explain that to people. You know, yes, I know you broke your canoe, you broke your drumstick, but you have to send that, technically speaking, you have to send that broken canoe back, because customs need to see that returned again and that the carnet is then clear and cancelled out. And as Peter said earlier, you know, customs around the world under the carnet system have a couple of years to come back with a claim. So you might think you're in the clear, and then a year down the line you end up with, or 2 years down the line, you end up with a claim for duties and taxes in a country that you've been to. All of those factors are all taking place anyway when you're going outside the EU, but those are now going to become an EU problem. And for many companies who up to now are just trading in Europe and are happily traveling, touring, trading, going back and forth to Europe, they're not going to be used to those things. They need to set up their own EORI numbers with customs. They need to register to export and import their goods. There are a number of processes and systems that will need to be taking place that are going to be new to some countries, some companies, sorry. They just won't be familiar with that. Particular, as I said, up and coming, smaller scale companies, artists who are just starting out and just aren't used to knowing how to do those sorts of things.
Yeah, can I come in on that, Peter? That so many good points there. But there is a cohort of businesses in the UK, and you know they'll cover the industries we're speaking about here too, who when they go outside the UK hitherto to do business only go to the European Union, right? So they've been used to a single market, they've been used to a customs union, and so the shock factor to them is much higher than to those people who actually do business with Japan or China or US, because everything kicks in, and that's a real concern. We reckon there's about 180,000 businesses like that throughout the UK, and obviously quite a lot of them will be down in this area. Second thing I'd say is on the British rowing rowing team one. Yeah, that's a good example, and that's why we've been saying to customs, look, why don't we just issue at virtually no cost a carnet with just yellows in it, and then they can demonstrate that the goods have been exported and re-imported and they are returned UK items. course, customs have got lots of temporary import and export regimes. But the carnet was invented because it was actually simple or simpler. But as I said, by the end of October, hopefully I will get a response on that Brexit carnet. And then the other thing I pick up on is that I think, Peter, you're absolutely right. And I don't know the figures, but they are out there somewhere. So many, you've heard in the financial services sector about passporting, and therefore, if you want to offer your financial services and other services throughout the EU 28, you've got to have an office in the European Union, and that is not the UK now, right? So, but by the same token, although it's not totally necessary, so many businesses are saying, look, we've set up a small post in Rotterdam or Paris or somewhere, just so if things do crop up, we can overcome. And if it works out, well, they might move more. We don't know what the sort of medium and long term result of that will be, but certainly businesses have been doing it.
So if businesses decide to have a warehouse facility or something that's based in mainland Europe, and but it would have normally been based in the UK, do we have any idea of if 10% or 15% of businesses do that, what impact it would have on employment in the UK? And because obviously they'll be employing fewer people in the UK spaces, looking after the product and maintaining the product, preparing the product, moving the product, and then we're going to all of a sudden then the EU would benefit from more rental, more commercial rental, more work, etc., etc., etc. So is there a point where the government might be saying, well, we really don't want that to happen, and we need to maintain all the employment in the UK, so therefore moving goods across, and we'll just focus on Europe for the moment, has got to be the easiest thing we can possibly do. I mean, the easiest thing was not to have left Europe, but actually, that's happening, so we can't change that. So is the carnet system the most effective way, or does it add much more in terms of administration and cost and potential delays when it comes to preparing and moving those goods with a carnet?
Yeah, well, remember, carnet is only for temporary exports, for certain things. And permanent exports. The government talks about frictionless trade. You can't have frictionless trade out if you're not in the same single market, right? You just can't. I mean, we can have a trade deal as we have now with Japan, and we've got the rollover with the Swiss, and there'll be others, maybe USA, Australia, and so on. But that's not a free trade deal in that there's no friction. There has to be evidences that you are complying with the FTA to gain the benefits of it.
Understood, but I think the reason I'm saying Europe is that it's Europe. We can get on a train, or we can get on a ferry, and we can be there in a very short period of time. And a lot of the work within our industry and within our sector will be in Europe. So it's that, and it will be moving around Europe. So it won't be going there to stay. And I accept the manufacturers will be selling product into Europe, and it will stay. But once it gets into Europe, it'll be moving around Europe and other areas, because that's the nature of the bulk of the products that we have, apart from products that go into installation. So it's really about that. So the impact of a understanding it can't be frictionless, but minimizing the friction. So what would be the best outcome, do you think, Lisa, for people moving goods around Europe like that all the time?
I mean, I think a carnet is the most straightforward. Otherwise, you're into temporary import bonds and T1 documents going from country to country. It can get messy. If you can raise a carnet, it is going to be the best option to do. And the way I see it happening is that you would raise, and Peter might correct me here, but I'm pretty sure that you raise a carnet, it will get stamped into France, and then you can free circulate within the EU still.
That's right.
Yes.
Carnet for the whole
one carnet, yes. Yeah. So if you were going on a tour anywhere globally, you would just raise one carnet, and that carnet will cover you for up to a 12-month period. Right. You can do 2 months, 6 months, or 12. And then that carnet, once it's issued, is like your passport for your person. It's your passport for your goods. And you take that with you and it gets stamped in and out of every country you go through. But the EU, it will be one entry. So you could enter into France, for example, or you might go on a plane and enter in Spain or Germany or wherever. You have it stamped out of the UK when you depart. You have it stamped into the first EU country of entry. And then when you leave from wherever the EU, it will be stamped out again from the EU.
Yep, hang on.
And back into the UK.
Naomi, from your members' point of view, because a lot of your members will be won't have the luxury of having production crews and production people. They'll have to do it all themselves, and when they'll have to move their goods around, very much like I did when I was a youngster, and we used to use carnets. Is there a sort of an ideal solution that you're trying to negotiate or lobby for that particular sector of the industry that is on the move all the time, because it has to be in order to make a living, but it doesn't have the capacity to employ third-party companies to say, right, you can bring all my production equipment and you can bring all this and you can bring all that. What would be the perfect outcome for you guys?
Well, I think the perfect outcome would be an exemption from carnets, but I think that's looking increasingly unlikely. Very possibly our members are going to have to deal with the carnet system. I think one of my real concerns is people who want to take merch and sell them at gigs, so really small scale stuff where you've just got a band travelling in with a box of CDs and their instruments. That's when carnets, I think, are going to be really prohibitive.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And what about? And I guess if because what happens certainly in our industry when people are traveling, when musicians are traveling, they end up in a city, they go somewhere, and all of a sudden they buy another instrument. And I guess providing they just keep the receipt, they can move that outside of the carnet. They can just bring that in and pay a tax if there is a tax to be paid. I would imagine. Yeah. Okay. I'm conscious of time. It's just after 11 o'clock. I'm just trying to look at the questions. We've had a question here which says the key issue for many of us is how temporary movement of goods will work. Will we need to prepare a complete ATA carnets for all movements within the EU? And Naomi did actually answer that one by saying yes, it's very likely you'll need a carnet. Carnet at 325 quid and last a year would cover the whole of the EU. So that was kind of an answer to that. More questions, and then I'll hand over. Is there capacity at both channel ports and equally importantly EU airports to process carnets and other temporary documents? Who wants to go with that one?
Well, shall I start? I mean, it's a very, very critical question. Remember, Customs, HMRC and Border Force are looking at carnets coming in. A lot more will be coming in too. More coming in than going out, actually. And so they're very concerned about ones coming in because, it is their role to make sure that the revenue is protected, so they're not deprived of any customs duty that they would otherwise have. Well, you mentioned, I mentioned earlier about these 10 new, was it 10? I said 10 new areas like in Ashford and so on that the HMRC and Michael Gove announced were being set up. So that was the idea of that, is to take the heat off the pressure at the actual border ports. But the other thing to say on that, what was it now? And oh yes, so in this in the document that I mentioned, the border with the European Union, okay, by the Border and Protocol group, it's got a section, I think on page 54, for import carnets, and then somewhere else, but you can sort of look it up, for export carnets and what the procedure is. So it says, I've got it here, when goods, oh no, it's inbound, we want outbound really, and I haven't got outbound. But basically, it does say there will be, or it implies there will be a special liaison between Border Force and the carnet holder to ensure that there is some customs officer at the port that they're going out from, and indeed coming back into. So, which is the way it's meant to work now, but I haven't seen it written down by HMRC quite so specifically.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Lisa, would you have any additional comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all well and good in theory. The reality is that when I'm talking to our overseas agents in all these different countries, you know, they've also got to plan for handling the customs, increased customs entries and carnet movements. I mean, you know, customs officers are very well used to dealing with carnets in all countries and with customs entries. In regards to staffing up to accommodate more, I don't know, but I'd be surprised if our European country colleagues have done a huge amount on that yet, but I may be wrong. I think it is a big challenge.
What happens? Okay, what happens when people are traveling from the UK into Europe, or indeed vice versa? I heard at the beginning of the year that different countries were imposing different fines if the paper wasn't completely correct, which would again slow up the process. Is that likely to happen, or is there just going to be a fixed fine if you show up somewhere and you have the incorrect paperwork or incomplete paperwork?
Okay, look, I'm going to speak slightly off the record here. I mean, in all honesty, what is the reality? It's a bit of a rhetorical question. What is the reality of these poor customs officers and border control officers really wanting to inspect and unpack every single truck that is passing across the border and every single piece of equipment to check that that broken drumstick is in there, or that the light bulbs here and there? Reality is that I think they're going to have a huge amount of bigger fish to fry than working out if, every single last item is in that truck. Technically speaking, every single item on the carnet should absolutely match up going in and out, and they should have somebody to check it, etc., etc. The reality is that it will be probably spot checks, and I think that, to be honest, to start off with, they will be absolutely inundated with people not really knowing what to do, and not, if they haven't got the capacity, do they really want a queue of trucks up the motorway in Kent? Do they really want to have Calais gridlocked with trucks sitting there while somebody's going through line by line 30-page carnet to work out if 2 Arctics worth of lights have actually got something in case number 62 that it says? That's just my opinion off the record.
Brilliant.
Okay. And a very valid opinion too, I think.
Sorry, Peter.
Okay. Well, one final question, then we must draw to a close. And it says, this is from Dave Crump. He says, "Thank you, Dave. Most importantly, is there clarity on what visa or work permits will be needed for UK citizens working temporarily in EU countries? If so, what is the application process, or is that not clear yet?"
It's not clear. It's not clear. It's not clear because we're still trying to influence this in the trade negotiations, very unsuccessfully, I'll say, because it's very difficult to get to anybody who's actually doing the drafting and the negotiating. But we just don't know at the moment. I think if we don't get a deal, then I think everyone's going to be scrabbling around trying to pull this information in a useful way. Certainly, that's what we're going to be trying to do. So unfortunately, I mean, as I said before, I think it's not visas that we need to worry about. It's work permits, most likely, but it's still unclear at the moment.
Okay. I'm being told here that we're out of time, which we could go on for longer than this, I'm sure, but I'm told we're out of time. So I think this is one to be, well, certainly for us to keep our eye and ear close to, and we may come back to three of you before Christmas, maybe to do an update for our website or something like that, which I think would be useful, just to keep people up to date with what the processes might be or might not be indeed. But for now, I just would like to thank you very much indeed for bringing so much expertise to this particular session. fascinating level of detail. I'd only really connected with it at the beginning of the year or about a year ago when we were working with the Music Industries Association to put on an event, and of course it's all gone in the background since COVID arrived. But now having to refresh everything, it is fascinating, the level of detail and thing we've got to do to try and make sure that our industry can continue to work effectively after Brexit is done in January. So there we are. So thank you once again. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Naomi. I'm sure if people have other questions, they can continue to send questions in. And if you're happy, we will send them to you to get your answers.
Yep, no problem.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. I do believe our next session is coming up fairly shortly. So thank you very much indeed for watching, and we bid you a very good day. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.